Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the third in our series of webinars presented by the BES-Net TT project. My name is Celeste Chariandi. I am the Science Communication Officer for the BES-Net TT project. Well, we just entered the Easter season, and it's a period that is said to be a time of new birth. And when we see many plants in bloom, notably our very vibrant poetries in time for the season of studies. So this new birth for plants begins with the important step of pollination. So it is a good time for us to host today's webinar on the topic of developing pollinator gardens, those safe havens for pollinator species. Our webinar today will comprise firstly, a presentation delivered by someone who actually has a pollinator garden at her home, Mrs. Rachel Leung. Next, we will welcome the BES-Net TT project manager, Mr. Shane Ballah, who will introduce us to some native plants that will attract pollinators. And then we wind up with a short clip of tips and takeaways for creating and managing your pollinator garden. Before we begin, I will remind you of a few housekeeping rules. This session will be recorded on Zoom, and the recording will be shared on the BES-Net TT Facebook page. In order to keep within our 1 hour time frame, the first presentation will be followed by a 10-minute question and answer segment, and our second presentation will have a 5-minute Q&A session. While the presentations are being delivered, you may post any questions that may arise in the Q&A area of the Zoom platform. You can see it right at the bottom of the Zoom screen. If during that question and answer segment, it is not possible to answer some of your questions, these will be addressed afterwards and will be posted with the recording of the session on the BES-Net TT project Facebook page. So let's get on to the presentations. Our first presenter is Mrs. Rachel Leung, and you can see her there. You can wave to her, who is a photographer, a designer, and owner of the brand, The Land of the Hummingbird. Having a passion for gardening and the natural world since childhood, for the past 8 years, she has been rewilding and developing her small backyard, mainly to attract hummingbirds, the subject of her photography and designs, and to support all kinds of pollinators. Mrs. Leung's presentation today is entitled Developing a Pollinator Paradise in Your Own Backyard. So we're now going to start you off with a presentation from Mrs. Rachel Leung.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining me. My name is Rachel Leung, and I'm going to be talking about how to develop a pollinator paradise in your own backyard. I'd just like to thank the BES-Net team for inviting me here this afternoon to talk to you about this. And I want to share some of my experiences and thoughts from developing a garden here, as you see all around me, in the last 8 years, from a very pristine, well-manicured garden into quite a wild jungle full of birds and pollinators, butterflies, bugs, lizards, you name it, it's here. So what is a pollinator garden? Well, it's a space, big or small, where we provide flowers and plants that support and feed bees, hummingbirds, moths, bats, insects, and basically anything that can help us with pollinating our plants and those in the nearby areas. The number of insects and pollinators in our world has decreased substantially in the last years, particularly over the last 20 years. Massive declines have been recorded in the insect population. And this, of course, will affect how we can actually grow our food. If we don't have the insects and the bees and so on to pollinate the plants, then eventually there will be no more plants. And of course, that means there will be no more people because we won't have anything to eat. Now, we have caused these declines in species. People have caused the declines in several ways, such as habitat destruction. Habitats are destroyed for many reasons. Rainforests are cut down, agricultural land is cleared, many areas are cleared for development and buildings. People have gardens which are very pristine. They have a lot of lawn and not much plants, and they use a lot of chemicals. So everything becomes very sterile, and all these beneficial creatures just have been disappearing. Alongside all of that, of course, and which aggravates it tremendously, is climate change. Higher temperatures, lower temperatures, more extreme temperatures, unseasonal temperatures, all these are leading to big die-outs in many of the insects, and we've seen a lot of insects just disappearing from the landscape. Also, as people have become more mobile and transport all over the world, many invasive species have been introduced into areas where they were not supposed to be, so they can actually take over the local species and make them disappear. And this goes for plants and animals, and there's been tremendous consequences all around the world from having invasive species introduced into areas through agriculture or transportation of foods, or people taking plants, or somehow accidentally carrying bugs or whatever. So this is also leading to a decline in our own local populations of pollinators. And of course, if you have local foods and flowers and trees and so on, we need the local pollinators to be able to make those continue. I'd like to show you just a few examples of the soul food that I have in my garden. As I mentioned, every day is a new discovery in the garden, and it just makes me smile every day. Something, whether it's a new flower that's opened, a new butterfly that I see, a new bird, whatever it is. And sometimes, yeah, it's sometimes really special. So first picture there you see is the black-throated mango hummingbird. This was a new bird that arrived not too long after I started putting out feeders, actually. So I have lots of those now, and they are always delightful. And of course, all the other hummingbirds that I'm getting in the garden too are just wonderful. I started out with just one species in the garden, copper rump, and I've now recorded 11 different species that have visited me. I don't get all of them all the time, but on a regular basis, I would have 6 or 7 different varieties. So that's just fantastic. Then in the middle there, you see the blue-grey tanager. He's enjoying some berries from the lantana bush, which is just a wonderful bush, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. And then on the right-hand side, you'll see a monarch, a beautiful female monarch. And I love to see those, and I'm always trying to provide more food for host plants for their caterpillars. It's always a challenge because no matter how much milkweed you have, they just lay more eggs and you get more caterpillars. And so trying to keep up with the food demand for all these caterpillars is quite a challenge. And then I have a little anole, I think it is lizard, on the left hand side there. So they're always really fun to watch scurrying around. I have lots of these lizards. They make interesting noises which I'd never heard before. And then they do this funny display of their throat sacs, which just looks crazy and funny too. So they're always very delightful and entertaining. And then in the middle there at the bottom, one day I heard these interesting bird calls and I thought, I recognise that bird. And I hadn't heard the bird in the garden before, and then I realised it was a barred antshrike. Now this was a juvenile male, I believe, and yeah, he came to my garden one day and he hung around in the bushes right outside my living room window, which is where I was standing when I took this photograph. He was sitting in the bottlebrush tree and he was calling, so I was calling back to him, and we had a nice little conversation, and I recorded some video and took some photos, and that was just wonderful. Now he, of course, is a forest bird, and I don't live in a forest, and really there's not many forests close to me in Diego Martin here. But I guess he must have just strayed off the beaten path a little bit, and he just visited me for a while. And I'm sure he found plenty of ants in my garden, because I really do have lots of ants. So yeah, he was a lovely visitor to have one time. Really exciting to have him there. And then the last picture on the right hand side there, that's the one of the orange-winged Amazon parrot. And we have lots of parrots in the neighbourhood, and we always hear them and see them flying overhead and so on, but actually they rarely come into the garden, which is probably a good thing, because I have a mango tree and I don't really want them coming and eating all my mangoes. They do occasionally come and have a few mangoes. They also enjoy my moringa tree sometimes and eat the pods. I did plant a Pride of Barbados tree for them, but I haven't seen them eating the seeds yet. This picture is actually taken of this little guy sitting in my neighbour's palm tree. Once the fruits are ripe there, they will come and enjoy those fruits, along with various other birds as well. So always beautiful. And of course, being a photographer, I just love having all these fantastic photo opportunities in my garden. So it makes me very happy. So how do we develop a pollinator garden? Well, the first step really is to start planting flowers. And we can do that in quite a small way at first, if we wish. If we only have a small porch or balcony, we can plant potted flowers. We just need a good sized pot with good compost and drainage. And we plant flowers that are suitable for growing in a pot, something quite small. If you have a bit more space, then you plant bigger plants and more of them. If you want to get started in your garden without taking over the entire garden with pollinator habitat, then yes, start in a small area and gradually increase that area as you go along. Now, in looking after the plants and flowers, we have to make sure that we don't use pesticides and herbicides, because these will actually counteract our good intentions by killing off all these bugs and beasts which we're actually trying to encourage into the garden to pollinate the flowers. Part of the garden needs to be habitat to support the creatures that will live in the garden. So we need to allow habitat to grow quite freely and create quite wild areas actually. Let the plants grow with as little interference as possible really. So we get seeds forming for birds to come and feed on, and bigger areas of habitat to shelter our creatures in the garden. And in avoiding chemicals in the garden, we don't want to put chemical fertilizers on the ground either. So that makes composting that much more important. So we need to compost all our waste, from kitchen waste to garden waste. We can use compost bins. We can use a cut and drop technique where you make your cuttings in the gardens, the trimmings of the bushes and so on, and you actually lay them on the ground under the bushes so they can rot down and compost in place and fertilize and enrich the soil. And of course, you can also have compost heap, which you could use for your grass cuttings and other leaf sweepings and things like that. I'd like to show you just a few of my pollinator plant favourites from my garden. Our next presenter will be talking in more detail about the types of plants which you can include in your pollinator garden. But I have just a few that I'd like to highlight here from my own garden. So first of all, the vervine. You see in the picture here a beautiful blue-tailed emerald, which is quite a rare hummingbird, which visited my garden and was enjoying the blue vervine I have growing there. I find the blue vervine really popular with hummingbirds, with butterflies, bees, and so on. You can also get the plants in pink and red, and it's a lovely staple to have in your garden. It takes quite a bit of water, and it can get quite big, but it does respond to cutting back, and it's easy to propagate by pieces or by seeds. And also in this slide is the lantana bush. Now this is tremendously important in the garden, and it supports a whole host of butterflies and bees and hummingbirds, and also the bigger birds, the tanagers and so on, for when it has its berries after the flowers. In this photo here you see the fritillary butterfly feeding on the lantana, and this is one of my favourite butterflies in the garden because it likes to lay its eggs on the passion fruit vines, which I also have in the garden. So you get lots of caterpillars coming and then lots more hummingbirds. So that is a lovely addition to the garden. Another favourite plant of mine in the garden is the Antigua heath. Now you can see it in the picture here, a cream one, and my hummingbirds absolutely love that, particularly the blue chin sapphires, the ruby topaz love it, and also the copper rumps. So I have that colour, I have a peach one, I have a red one. They grow quite prolifically, they do like quite a bit of water, and they seed themselves and send out new plants quite easily. So it's easy to get a lot of those plants in your garden. They do get a bit straggly, so you need to cut them back every now and again. But yeah, really important plants for pollinators. And then also on the right side of the image, there is the fire spike. This is a kind of purplish one. And there's also a lovely red one. Again, very easy to propagate by pieces. And the birds are very keen on it. The hummingbirds love it, the butterflies, the bees. It creates a very pretty display in the garden, and it's really great for the pollinators. The bottlebrush tree is a really great addition to any pollinator garden. It has very interesting leaves and growth, and the flowers are pretty interesting shapes and very attractive to the birds, like cocaine for the birds. I've seen many different hummingbirds feeding on this, including tufted coquette, which is quite a rare one to get. And it's a real pleasure to see the coquette feeding on those flowers. The picture shows a female blue chin sapphire, and they also love them. So the bottlebrush can get quite big, and you need to be a little careful about where you plant it because I believe the roots are quite invasive. But I also understand you can get a dwarf version, so that is great for smaller spaces. And the other plant on this slide is the Erythrina bidwilli, or I think it's false coral tree it's called, or false immortelle. Beautiful showy displays of red flowers, and it tends to be quite tall, and you get beautiful images of birds against blue sky. The black-throated mangoes love this one, the ruby topaz, the copper rumps, and the blue chin sapphires, and the hermits, and all the different birds and butterflies too. So this is a really great bush to include in the garden. So we can't really have a presentation about pollinator gardens without talking about hummingbird feeders. I'm not going to spend too long on this, but I just wanted to mention them. I really started my pollinator garden with hummingbird feeders. I had a very manicured garden with not much flowers at all in it, and I had seen one or two hummingbirds, and I really wanted to encourage them into the space because I love them and I love to take photographs of them. So I started hanging feeders, and sure enough, once the feeders were there, the hummingbirds started to come. Once I introduced flowers and more habitat and so on, then the hummingbirds came even more. But with the feeders, I mean, yes, they're great for attracting hummingbirds,
but they are a daily commitment. And if you're not willing to take on the commitment of caring for them properly, making the solution, keeping the feeders very clean, changing them daily or every other day, then if you can't make that commitment, then you really shouldn't put them out in your garden. Because if you put them in the garden and they get dirty, the mold grows and so on, then you're basically poisoning your birds, and this is not a nice thing at all. So yeah, you need to be committed to be able to do them, to actually have them successfully in your garden. But particularly if you're a photographer or you just like to sit and look at the birds, it's great because you can find a nice stand for the feeder, kind of a shepherd hook thing. They sell those at some of the garden centres, or you can make something or have someone make one. And then you can place the hummingbird feeders pretty much wherever you want to, quite close to the house, so that you can see the birds close up. Always good to put them in a place where the light shines on the birds though, because if you hang them on the edge of your roof, you'll probably just get silhouettes of the birds, so they're not going to see the colours properly. So if you can hang them kind of out into the garden, then you will actually see the birds much better, and you'll be able to enjoy them much better. Pollinator gardens are very beneficial for the environment and our biodiversity, but they also have some challenges. If you're a regular person with a suburban garden, quite often people don't like to be surrounded by bugs and beasties, things like spiders and ants and beetles and all that kind of thing. So if you're going to cultivate a pollinator garden, you need to be a little bit tolerant, or become tolerant, of some of these new creatures that will come into your space, because we try to avoid using pesticides and so on, and we don't want to kill off the new visitors to our space. But somehow we need to learn to live with them. The picture here is showing a pink-toed tarantula. I was actually delighted to discover I'd got a tarantula in my garden a couple of years back, because even though I don't really like spiders, I do like to photograph them. So he was in my garage, and I had some fun taking some pictures of him as he moved around the garden. So that was really nice to see. I haven't seen him recently. I don't know if he's still around, but I would be quite happy to see him. I've also had snakes in the garden, which are also beautiful to see. Just little ones, not harmful at all. And I guess they must eat the little frogs and lizards and so on. I'm happy with anything that comes into the garden that doesn't eat my hummingbirds. I have had some issues though with some predators in the garden, namely the striated heron, who was coming to visit very often and often flying off with birds. I think probably mostly banana quits. I have a lot of those in the garden. But one day I saw the heron with a black-throated mango in its beak, and then it flew away with it. And I was horribly, horribly upset by that. So yeah, I don't want the heron eating my birds. I have had an egret recently coming by and caught him in the act of eating lizards in amongst the Rangoon vine. I guess they must have a nest nearby because I live quite close to the river. So yeah, I guess it's a circle of life. They're coming for their food. And another creature I have around who is also a predator but very nice to see and hear is the little ferruginous pygmy owl. Often hear him at night calling. In fact, I often have little conversations with him at night. And he comes quite close to the garden, sometimes sits on one of the hummingbird feeder stands, and otherwise on the light pole just close to the garden. So he's great to see, but I'm sure he's eating stuff as well, but hopefully no hummingbirds. So how can we maintain our pollinator gardens? We want them to be as natural as possible, but we do need to be able to live with what's going on in there, even if we are a little bit uncomfortable with some of the creepy crawlies. Generally, we want to avoid chemicals. We want to compost our waste. We want to use cut and drop techniques. We want to use organic fertilizers, and we want to use natural pest control as much as possible. Really, the pest control can be one of the biggest challenges, so I'm going to look at that in a little bit more detail in the next slide. If If you want to try a few homemade natural insecticides, then the ones on the slide here can give you a bit of a starting point. Something very simple, literally vegetable oil in water sprayed onto the affected plants for aphids and so on. That can be quite effective. If you add in liquid soap such as liquid Castile soap or Dawn dishwashing soap, that also helps to control things like aphids. Garlic and chili pepper spray have also been found to be very effective, as has neem oil, and diatomaceous earth is also a product which is natural and can be used to help to control bugs, ants and so on. You can find out lots more about these things online. I've got an example of one of the sites you can check out some more information further down in the presentation. So what are the key takeaways from this little presentation of mine? I would say start small. Even if you only have a small space, you can plant pollinator-friendly flowers, create habitat for our pollinators, and you can make a difference. If enough people make a difference, even on a small scale, the overall effect is going to be a great benefit to our biodiversity. When you're doing your pollinator garden, be sure to avoid chemicals. Know what you're putting on your garden, on your plants, and avoid chemicals, artificial chemicals, as much as you can. And tell your friends. Encourage people to participate. Get people to plant a pot of flowers on their porches or in their gardens. Devote a small area in your garden to pollinator-friendly habitat. It will make a difference. So now I'd like to invite you to come on a little garden tour with me. So sit tight and follow me into the garden. So we're going to go for a little walk around the garden so I can show you some of my birds and pollinators and things. You can see in the front garden here we have the yellow tacoma trees up there. Not too many flowers at the moment. We have the bottle brush up at the top. We have some feeders here. There's some birds coming on them. The beautiful ruby topaz, a real prize to have in your garden, I tell you. So we have some blue plumbago down there, which I find the butterflies like and the bees, but the hummingbirds don't really go on it too much. Everything looking a bit dry at the moment. That's Kufia over there, the orange, which is nice, and of course the Ixora, the Sanchisia there, which the copper rumps particularly like. And then we've got some purple fire spike over here. We have an oriole just shooting in the back there. So the fire spike is great for bees and butterflies and hummingbirds, and the banana quits love it too. We've got some heliconias over in the back there and some pink ginger lilies. Then we have a bit of open space there which I'm trying to plant up when we get a bit of rain. Lots of verbine here. I have some bougainvillea, but I never really get much joy with those. I can't seem to even get flowers on, let alone hummingbirds feeding on it. So I have some big crinum lilies here. There's a beautiful flower there, which the bees absolutely love. You can see any bees on it at the moment. And a little area around here. You can hear the birds as we come in the back. Oh, that was a starthroat flying over there. So I have this wonderful Mexican cape, which looks fantastic, and the hummingbirds enjoy, usually in the morning. We have a big moringa tree in the back here, which all the birds love, and I have wild tobacco behind that, which is great for the flowers and the berries for lots of different birds and hummingbirds, and the bees absolutely love the flowers. I have lantana down here, sunflowers waiting for the flowers there to come. I have some more Sanchisia around here. And I have some more fire spike, red and purple there. Heliconias in the back. Some Antigua heath, a bit dry at the moment, so not too many flowers. Some nice big heliconias in the back there. I see the hermits feeding on those quite often. And then the moringa tree in the back here. I have Barbados, Pride of Barbados, the yellow one there, which the hummingbirds go on sometimes. Have mangoes. The birds all love the mango tree, of course, for the fruit, but then also you get lots of little flies and things for the hummingbirds. Have a few orchids and things. Everything's looking a bit, needing a bit of care and more water at the moment because it has been very dry. And then here is one of my favourite plants, which is looking a bit sad at the moment, but it's a pink ornamental banana. So it has the flower and the fruit, and all the bees and the hummingbirds love the flowers, and then the bigger birds, the tanagers and so on, they love the fruit when it ripens. I have a bird's nest in there. I don't know if you can see it from here. It's a little brown dove nest in there. She's a bit shy, so she's flown away now that we're close. And I have vervine here, which I had to cut back recently because I had a lot of blight on it and I couldn't seem to get rid of it, so I literally just had to cut it off and get rid of it. And then a big lantana up against the wall, which always is full of birds. There's a hummingbird feeding in the back there, just going over there. There it goes. Lots of Antigua heath, which is so pretty, and the birds love it. And then I've got fire spike down there a bit. I have a hibiscus, which doesn't really do much for the hummingbirds, to be honest, but it looks very pretty. And a bougainvillea here, which I don't really see them feeding on, but they love to perch on it, so that's nice. And a few other bits and pieces around here. I have pentaplants down here. Those are great for the butterflies, and I see the birds on it sometimes, not that often. I have a combretum rotundifolium down there, which doesn't have any flowers on yet. That's a monkey brush. It's a new plant, it hasn't got flowering yet. I'm looking forward to that one. More Antigua heath there. I have a huge Rangoon vine all around here, which is not flowering too much right now, but it's so pretty and so scented when it does. The butterflies go on it a bit, but the birds don't really feed on it too often. Occasionally I'll get a young one feeding on it, which is very pretty. And a bit more vervine down here. I think looking a bit dry in the back. Lots more of the fire spike. That's a giant white bird of paradise, which is huge. I have to keep cutting it down because it gets too big. And then a pink Musciander, Queen Surrogate, which is very pretty. I'm waiting for a little hermit to come and feed on there, but I haven't seen one yet. I'm still waiting. And round again to some more fire spike, which I see birds feeding on quite often. Nice lizard there. Oh. That's about it. I'd like to thank you all for joining me to listen to my presentation about how to develop a pollinator paradise in your own backyard. I hope you found the pictures enjoyable and some useful information in the presentation, and I'm very happy to answer your questions at this stage. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Ms. Leong, for that very interesting and gorgeous presentation, complete with a guided tour of your pollinator garden. So we now move into our question and answer session, and we're going to leave this session open for about 10 minutes. Okay, so I'm now going to look at our Q&A section to see what questions may have come up. Okay, there were two questions that were posed that I gave written responses to already. The first one was from John Kisoon, And he was asking, is there anywhere online where we can get a listing of local flowering plants to attract pollinators? So my response to him was that actually in our next segment, we will have an introduction to exactly that topic. So hold your horses. We're going to get to that point just now. Rachel, if you have anything you want to add to that, though, in the event that you have any other sources you'd like to share.
Okay, trying to get the microphone off. Yes, I have some lists which I have put on my Facebook page, actually, on my Land of the Hummingbird Facebook page of flowers and things. I know there are some other lists around, and I think it would be good to really get a central repository of this information going. So I would hope to work with you guys to, with Shane in particular, to try and enhance the list and make it available.
Yes. And Shane, perhaps you can give a little insight to our listeners with respect to one of those activities that is going to be accomplished under the project with respect to plants and pollinators.
Yes, I can, Celeste. So one of the activities that we are pursuing is the development of a plant pollinator database. Because as most of you probably realize by now, if not before, we have limited information on local plants and who pollinates them. We know in the literature there's a lot of information around, but oftentimes it's not specific to Trinidad and Tobago. So we're trying to pull all that information together in one location, and it serves two purposes. One, persons can then be able now to find out information on local plants, and it will also guide future research. So we'll know where the gaps are, and we'll know where we can put attention on what plants need more research done to tell us exactly who amongst the local animals are pollinated. Yeah.
Okay, we have a question as well from Kara, who asked whether this presentation will be shared online, and it gives me the opportunity to reiterate that yes, the recording from this Zoom webinar will be posted on our BES-Net TT Facebook page. So just look for BES-Net.TT on Facebook, and you will be able to get that recording as soon as we post it, as well as on the BES-Net webpage. Okay, I'm seeing some more questions rolling in. Okay, Laura Ann is asking, a neighbor has been losing plants through stray cats urinating on them. Is there a way to deter the cats without harming them? Any ideas, Rachel?
Well, happily, I don't have a cat problem because I have two little dogs in the garden. So I think that's my answer, chemical free. I know, I remember from my UK gardening days that there were certain plants which would deter cats. I'm really not sure what they might be equivalents here in Trinidad and Tobago, but I would only suggest to have a look online. There's usually a lot of suggestions that people have natural deterrents. Yeah.
Okay, Karen is also asking, Rachel, what do you use in your hummingbird feeders? Fortunately, we do have quite a few plants in our garden that attract pollinators, but I'd love to add some feeders again.
First of all, I'd like to say hello, Karen, and welcome from Colorado. I know you're calling in. Yes, I use a solution, 1 part sugar, white sugar, to 4 parts water, which is the water is heated and the sugar dissolved and then used in the feeders. And as I mentioned in the presentation, it's very important to change the feeders very regularly. And depending on the temperatures that you experience during the day, you may need to do that every day or every other day to make sure that the feeder stays very clean, and you need to scrub it out, make sure there's no mold growing in it, and so on.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Rachel. Popping over onto the chat now, because I'm not seeing any more questions in the Q&A. Okay, people mentioning that they have vervine, they have lantanas, the passion fruit vine, other things that attract pollinators. People also making the comment that they've noticed fewer butterflies than when they were growing up. Again, a question, I think you've answered that already from Karen. The Hummingbirds by Me Love the Pakistakis. The author of the book Nature's Hope. Well, I guess we'll get that in a recording, but Rachel, can you
Yeah,
give
I'm
us?
afraid off the top of my head, I can't remember what it is.
Okay, so
but yeah, you'll see it on the
recording.
presentation. I could add that later.
Right. And other persons mentioning that in the urban areas, the noise and disturbances, and maybe those are also affecting the pollinator diversity that they're seeing.
Okay, yes, I could say in response to that, I have quite a noisy neighborhood myself. I live very close to a main road, just on the other side of my wall. And actually, it's just like a little haven in here. Once you provide the habitat and the food for the pollinators, they don't seem to mind that there's a lot of disturbances going on around. If I have people working in the garden, for example, mowing lawn or whatever, they may just head out for a little while. But generally, creatures coexist with us, whatever we're doing.
Okay. And someone is also asking, do you also have particular pollinators appearing on petunias? Have you noticed any of those?
Well, I personally don't grow petunias because I remember those as being a plant from the UK, and I know for sure it's not a local plant here, and it's quite difficult to grow. So I can't really answer that. I mean, I know they do grow it in the US as well, and hummingbirds will go on petunias. But yeah, I don't have any local information on that. I'm sorry.
Okay. Pat is also asking, and maybe Shane, you could answer this question. Will the plant listing be available as a work in progress, or do we have to wait until the list is completed?
Good question, Pat. My intention right now, because the process is being done via volunteers together with us, the intention is that by about end of May, June, we should have a working list, and then it's just a question of deciding what format that should take in terms of making it available. Because a list per se was nice, but I think persons would also need to have photographs and of course additional information on different plants. So give us until, let's say, the end of May to have something in draft, preliminary, and then certainly by the end of the project, we expect to have a full list. Yes. Okay.
Okay, I'm just going to take 2 more questions because of time. So the others will be answered. The answers will be posted on Facebook. The first question is from Kylan John, and he's asking, do you have any advice for controlling weeds with natural products?
Personally, I don't actually get too hung up about weeds. I guess my main way of controlling them is just pulling them out, or actually by using the cut and drop method, which basically smothers them. So if you've got the leaf matter and whatever lying on top, then they would be controlled a little bit. But I just grow lots of plants and the weeds struggle with them. Yeah, so I don't get too hung up about weeds. In fact, some of the weeds are really good for the pollinators anyway.
I was just about to add that the pollinator garden is not it's pretty, it has flowers, but the emphasis is on really making it a safe haven for pollinators. So weeds are good too. Yes. Okay, so the other question I'm going to take is from John Kissoon again, and it says, it's a well-known fact that Africanized bees are known to be quite aggressive as a pollinator. Are Africanized bees the primary bee species in Trinidad? And are there any local bee species that are less aggressive? I think we need Lena in here to answer this one, perhaps.
Hi, everybody. Yes, I could take this one. So actually, the honeybees that we have in Trinidad are all honeybees are an introduced species. They're not native to here. We have over 100 other species of bees. Most species do not produce honey, but they are great pollinators. So actually most bee species nest in the ground, over 70% of them. Most of them are solitary. We only have a handful of species that are social or truly social, and most of them are stingless bees. Actually, all of them are stingless bees, which you can also keep for honey production and so on. So although honeybees, apis bees, have received the bulk of the attention globally in terms of conservation and management, largely because people depend on them for food and other products. The native species are actually much better for pollination, and they are much well, they're better for pollination, and they can also be used for other human benefits, like getting wax, not necessarily wax, but things like propolis and pollen and bee bread and all these kinds of things that you can get out of bees otherwise, including honey. And the honey is very valuable. It's used medicinally and can cost up to $50 to $75 for a teaspoon, actually. So keeping those, we actually advocate a lot for keeping stingless bees. So in short, there are tons of local bee species around. We just don't have that much information on them. But we are also working on compiling that and sharing more information on the bee species that we have. We're going to be doing a bee survey as well, to sort of see if we find anything new and can sort of consolidate what we have existing here. I hope that helps.
Okay, great. Thanks, Lena. And thanks again, Rachel. We do need to wrap up this Q&A session because we have another presentation coming up. But I will note again that the questions that were not answered live, we will ensure that these are answered and it is posted with the recording later on. So I now move on to our second presentation. And our second presentation today will come from Mr. Shane Ballah. He's an environmental consultant with a strong educational background in ecology, plant-insect interactions, and botany. He has worked on projects with various agencies, including the Ministry of Works and Transport, the IUCN, FAO, and NIDCO. Mr. Ballah specializes in plant identification, ecological assessments, and bryophytes, and is an active member of the local environmental community and the project manager for the BES-Net TT project. His presentation today is entitled Plants of Trinidad and Tobago, Native Plants that Attract Pollinators. So I now hand you over to Mr. Ballah.
Sorry, thank you, Celeste, for that. Are you seeing my screen, everyone? Celeste, can I get some feedback?
Yes, Shane? So
yes, good. I'm gonna take my camera off because I think that's gonna distract. And once you guys can hear me, I'm gonna go forward. So let me go back one step. Right, so because we have limited time and because this is such an interesting topic, I've decided what I'm going to do is simply introduce. Now, I know most of you guys are probably looking forward to getting a nice detailed list. I am going to show some plants at the end, but I think it's important that we understand the context of the importance of plants and the importance of selecting local plants in particular. So let's start with some simple things. Native versus exotic. So most times when you go in gardens locally, you will see a number of exotic plants. And I'm going to show you in a while, based on our recent survey of plants in Trinidad and Tobago, exactly what the numbers say in terms of how many exotics and natives we have. But we need to get our terminology down proper. So when we speak of native, we're really talking about a plant that has originated and it has evolved within its surrounding habits and adapted to it within its local environment. This is, of course, in contrast to a non-native plant or an exotic, basically a plant that has evolved somewhere else and has been brought into its current location. So it's not native, it's an exotic. Two other terms which pop up a lot of time and people get a little confused about is the term of naturalized. So naturalized, just as the same way you have persons can come to a country and eventually they become naturalized through a process. You can have a non-native plant which with time does not need any human intervention to help it reproduce or maintain itself in the environment. And when that has reached a state, we consider that plant to become naturalized. So again, it's not a native plant, but because it's in the environment for so long, and because it's now able to reproduce on its own, it's naturalized. And then of course we have invasives. Invasives are a tricky term because again, a plant can be native in one place, one location in fact, and be invasive somewhere else. So a definition of that is that a plant that is both a non-native and able to establish on many sites, grow quickly and spread to the point of disrupting plant communities or ecosystems. And that's a key distinction here. I want to say at this point, there are a number of our local I shouldn't say local, number of our exotics that we have, which are known as invasive in other countries, but which are not considered invasive locally. And that's primarily because they haven't got out into the environment yet, or they haven't been able to disrupt ecosystems. But that can also be because we simply have not paid any attention to them, or if we haven't had enough time to study what's going on. So it's important that we understand these distinctions. So what does the data for Trinidad tell us? And this is taken from the 2016 survey that was done in the Darwin project by Como et al. And it should not surprise you that almost a third of the plants that we have in Trinidad are exotic. Yeah. According to that list, we have a total of 3,638 plants. And I'm going to show you in a while the main families that they come from. But out of that, 222 are introduced. They are exotic. They were not originally here. They've been brought in. That is potentially a cause for concern on a small island like ours, especially where a lot of exotics don't have the sort of predators, the herbivores that they would normally encounter in their natural habitat. So one can only have a guess as to what will happen with time. In fact, I was reading a paper done by Shobha Maraj the other day, I think from her thesis, and she sort of alluded to the fact that some of our local tree species, which are quite important, certainly due to climate change and other factors, may become limited. Their numbers will be significantly reduced as we go forward. So one can only imagine what the effect of the introduced plant community will be on the native plant community in perhaps another 50, 60, 100 years. I'm going to give you three quick examples here when we talk about exotic and local. So everybody knows sapodilla. And if you ask the average person if sapodilla a local plant or a native plant, they'll say yes, but sapodilla is not. On the other hand, you have Ballah. Both are in the same family, both are in the same genus. Ballah is local. You have crepe ginger, which some people utilize as an ornamental plant, again and introduced, but we have a local equivalent, which is Costus scaba. We also have two other Costus, which you find in the forest, along water edges and stuff like this, which can easily be utilized, again, local. Another interesting one, which I was mentioning earlier on, is Mexican sunflower. You go into a number of gardens and you see it popping up all over the place, but Mexican sunflower is not native to Trinidad and Tobago. But of course, we do have a local equivalent, the Wedelia trilobata, graveyard daisy, and I'll show you a picture at the end, which again is quite common. It's a very nice plant, forms a nice carpet, and just as functional within the ecosystem as Titonia. So you have that sort of feature popping up in terms of exotic versus local. So again, the figures, because the figures are nice when we talk about the species-rich families in Trinidad's flora. You can see that the Fabaceae, now Fabaceae, don't get lost with that. Those are just your legumes, your peas and your beans and so on. They top the list, over 297 species. Next in line, you have your grasses, your Poaceae. It shouldn't surprise us that the orchids are a very large number of species in Trinidad and Tobago. Your Rubiaceae, things like your Psychotria and so forth. Next in line, your Cyperaceae, that's your sedges. So again, sedges, like your grasses, very abundant. Asteraceae, that's the same family you would have got in your Mexican sunflower, quite a very big family. Malvaceae and Euphorbiaceae round off the list. So those are the most common species-rich families in Trinidad. And there I say, if you were to select for what sort of plants you want to put in your garden, you may want to pay attention to some of these families, partly because they're so well represented within the local flora. So again, just to quickly run through, or presented before, I've touched on some of this. If you're looking to select plants for your garden, again, it's nice to have an idea of what you want in mind. I mean, some people are simply doing things for ornamental purposes. It may be for food production. You may want to have a garden strictly with local plants. You may only want to have exotics, which I tend to discourage, but I can understand. And of course, you might want to have a mix of plants that are trees, shrubs, vines, what have you, inside of there. Again, it all depends on what one is trying to achieve. I tend to encourage more local plants. And the prime example of this, even though some persons can't appreciate it, if you were to leave your backyard simply to grow as is, a number of local plants will simply thrive. And inside of there, you may find very interesting flowers, which if you observe them properly, will attract a number of visitors. Right, so what do we want to attract? Obviously, we want to attract bees, butterfly, birds, bats, what have you. So in terms of plant selection, things that would be important would be color, of course, because in the case of bees, for instance, they're attracted to flowers with bright colors, blues and yellows, but of course they don't pick up red, whereas hummingbirds will easily pick up red. And so you tend to find that kind of variation taking place. So your choice of plant will, of course, depend on what you're trying to attract. If you want to mix, then of course you want to have a mix of flowers that are reds and blues and yellows and stuff like that. Shape is important again, because of course many pollinators like bees and butterflies and beetles and so on need a surface on which to land. Yeah, long tubular flowers obviously will need a pollinator that can reach down into the nectary. So a lot of the moths are good at this. Sphinx moth is very good. Things to consider. Other things will be scent and timing. Flowers tend to have strong scents, of course, and you can pick that up, and that will attract certain pollinators. And of course, timing. Flowers open diurnally, some open only in the night. So in considering a garden, you probably want to have a mix of that so that you also appeal to the pollinator like the bats that mainly come out at night, and certainly some of the moths as well. So I'm going to quickly show some examples. Again, my intention here is that I will continue this particular topic in future webinars because I want to be able to go through each of the local families that we have and pull out some good examples of local plants that you can easily find within the forest edges, maybe within the forest. And hopefully it will encourage nurseries and persons who are interested to start cultivating them, because that also is one of the challenges that we have. A number of persons simply don't know how to cultivate them because there hasn't been much information or studies done on it. And then of course they don't know where to find them, right? So I pulled out some of the passion fruits, the Passifloraceae. It should not surprise you that two of these are exotic. Your common passion fruit, which is Passiflora edulis, is unintroduced, as well as Barbadina, which everybody loves and we grow and we eat, but that is an introduced Passiflora. But of course, we have 7 other native ones, of which Fetida is one, the Jumbie watermelon. So again, if I had to choose in my garden, I would probably put in the Fetida. It's not that I would leave out Edulis, because that's pretty good, you can use it, but you can also eat the Jumbie watermelon fruit. It tastes very nice. You might not want to make a drink out of it, but it's pretty good. Some other local examples, Combretum cocosea, sorry. Again, Combretaceae, nice and red flower. This is of course a tree, so it can get pretty big, but it can be maintained as a small shade tree. Cardiospermum, the balloon plant. Most persons have seen this. You're probably seeing it as just a vine that's growing and you're not too sure what's going on there. The flowers are very short-lived, but again, very nice, very attractive. And incidentally, it's also, you can see from the color, which is very white, it tends to attract a lot of the night visitors. Lantana canescens. You're familiar with Lantana camara, of course, but we have about 2 or 3 other lantanas, which are very nice, which can be encouraged to grow within a garden. And of course, Mucana solanae. We're all familiar with Mucana pruriens, which is your cow witch. But you also have donkey eye, and donkey eye flowers are very nice, very attractive. It's a very nice vine. And incidentally, it's also one of those that from the literature is bat pollinated. So that's a good one to put. A couple more examples quickly. The Widelia trilobata, which I spoke about, graveyard daisy. Again, you're seeing this around the place. Not to be confused with Bidens pilosa, which is railway daisy. And I'll show you more of that in the next series seminars. We have Salvia coccinea, scarlet sage. Again, you see this along a number of roadsides and in disturbed habitats, which again is where a lot of these things pop up. Disturbed because nobody has gone in and cut them down. Yeah. Combretum fruticosum, what people call the orange flame tree. That's the typo there, orange flame tree. Again, very nice, very beautiful, nice red flowers. Again, one of those that's bat pollinated. And of course, Heliconia psittacorum. Incidentally, when it comes to the Heliconiaceae, we only have 5 native Heliconia. Interesting, huh? Because if you go through Trinidad, you'll see hundreds of varieties, hundreds. But we really only have 5 native ones. Psittacorum being the most common one, you'll see in disturbed habitats along by the seasides, areas that are fire burnt and so forth. And of course, we all know the Balisate, Heliconia behind. So those are just a few quick examples. Like I said, because I know time is limited, what I intend to do is touch on, specifically touch on plants that can be utilized by birds, bees, butterflies, and certainly the bats. There's some interesting plants that will attract bats for those who are interested in that kind of garden. So I'll roll that out in the series to come. And I think I'm within time still, Celeste. So that will be it for me. I'll take any questions persons have. Sorry to rush. Thank you.
Okay, yes. Thanks so much, Shane, for that very full introduction to pollinator attracting plants. And I think we have a good few ideas for plant selection for pollinator gardens now. Because we have crossed 2 o'clock, we are going to have a very brief 5-minute question and answer segment before very last presentation, which trust me will be 2 minutes long. So I'm going to a question here. Petal is asking Shane whether the national data that you gave ahead, whether that was captured, whether that data also captured information from Tobago.
Yes, so that was taken from the Darwin Project, and the Darwin Project surveyed both Trinidad and Tobago. In fact, if you read the monograph that was produced, you'll see a breakdown of plants for Tobago versus the one for Trinidad. Because Tobago has some unique plants, which makes its flora similar to what you have up in the Eastern Caribbean.
Okay, great. We're going over to the chat now, and okay, the comment here is that Shane, great information, very quick. So I guess you're going to be looking forward to our recording on our Facebook page when we post it up. And of course, future presentations on bees, birds, and bats. Going back to the Q&A now, Kim Conrad is asking, where do you get these plants to purchase?
Right, and that is the problem, as I was chatting earlier with Rachel about this. So it's a kind of push and pull, because a lot of the local nurseries do not have many of these local plants because they're providing what customers want. And of course, persons who are going looking for local plants are few and far between, and they're going looking for exotics. In fact, I had thought about putting up a list, because I just did a quick search last week on some local nurseries, and they have their plant list. And I was going to put that up and show an example of what a typical nursery in Trinidad offers. When you go through that list, over 80% of the plants are all exotic. Now, granted, a number of them are fruit trees, so mango and that sort of thing. Obviously, all of the mangoes will be introduced, all the citruses are introduced. But to answer your question, it is hard to get, but it can start. And I would encourage persons to, if with a little bit of information that we're going to give you, you can go out on your hikes and on your walks. I'm not saying go and simply take from protected areas, don't get me wrong, but you can then start to collect seeds, and you can start to grow them on your own and cultivate your own backyard with local plants. That's the best way it's going to have to start.
Okay, right. Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of people agreeing. Yes, we have to go native. They're looking forward to the list when we do prepare that list of plants and pollinators that are attracted by them. There's a question. Please provide the said list of local flowering plants. There's a lot of synergy between the collection and sale of local plants and the development of flower gardens in public parks. I think on that note of public parks, I also want to mention that, you know, we did invite members of representatives from each of the regional corporations to attend this webinar. And won't it be great, in fact, if in some of our public parks, maybe a little corner is reserved as a pollinator garden. Okay, so I think those are the questions we're going to take for this segment. It's now 2:05, and we will launch very quickly into a very short presentation. We hope we've stimulated your interest and your green thumbs and made you ready to leap into pollinator garden development and doing your part to conserve these very important organisms. We're now going to give you a very short feature that we've put together just as a way of reminding you of some of the key tips and takeaways that we want you to go away with at the end of this webinar. Okay, so hang on, I just need to share the screen. Okay, just a little fun ending there to our presentation for today. We hope that you enjoyed everything that you saw today, and we hope that you learned a lot from it. We'd like to thank once again our presenters, Rachel Leung and Shane Ballah, for their contribution to today's session. And all you participants, many thanks for your interest, your questions, and your overall participation in today's webinar. Please remember that the recording of the webinar, as well as responses to any unanswered questions, will be posted on the project's Facebook page. So continue to follow us on BES-Net.tt on Facebook for information on upcoming project activities, including webinars. And next month's webinar should be on the topic of stingless bees. So please follow us on Facebook so you can get the date and time of that presentation. Also want to remind you of our knowledge, attitudes, and practices survey on pollinators. We've posted the survey link in the chat. So I encourage you to complete the survey and share it in your networks. The link is in the chat. We look forward to your continued interest and engagement in the BES-Net TT project, and we thank you for staying on a little later with us today. Thank you so much, and goodbye.